Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So today I'm going to start by giving a brief history of EBSCO and Zafira's work with RDF and BIBFRAME. I'm going to cover some BIBFRAME services that we're using today at EBSCO and talk about how we're creating and using BIBFRAME resources with the Library Link Network. I'll give you a few examples of these data graphs in action, and then I'll end by talking about what's on the horizon for the coming months and years. So my colleague, Eric Miller, back in 1996, helped create the first draft of the resource description framework model. And their initial goal was to build a vendor-neutral system of metadata. And after the W3C adopted this standard in 1999, Zafira co-founders collaborated with that group and others to help refine those specifications and help RDF get adopted by publishers of data on the web. From 2007 to 2012, Zafira worked across a variety of industries. So Eric created the company Zafira in 2007. And from there, they started to work with healthcare companies, agricultural companies, as well as manufacturing and financial services. And then in 2012, the Library of Congress hired Zafira to help develop the initial model that kickstarted the BIBFRAME initiative. And then after concluding the initial round of contracts in 2014, Zafira moved on to work with other libraries to help adopt linked data. So during that time, Zafira also helped create schema.org's borrow action and began to publish data graphs at scale in production for libraries. So I joined Zafira in 2014 after leaving the library at UCLA. And initially, as library strategist with Zafira, I worked with a small group of libraries to establish the Library Link Network. And this was done in partnership with Zafira, EBSCO, and a few other service providers. And so after we had been publishing this data on the web for a few years, we were advocating with partners, including Google, so that they could begin to understand library data and use it in their applications. So in 2017, Google launched the option to borrow books from their knowledge graph for libraries in the United States. And then a few years after that, as the pandemic started, I joined EBSCO with the Zafira team because EBSCO acquired Zafira and the Library Link Network. Since then, we've partnered with Google Books to launch borrow options in a few other countries, including Canada and Australia. And as of today, the Library Link Network has data from over 2,000 libraries, representing over 6,000 physical library locations. And together, these libraries are publishing data for over 250 million instances that are available on the web. So the next chapter, which I'll talk about in the end of my presentation, is all about integrating this data and these data services into other applications and platforms, including Folio. So you'll hear me talk about BIBFRAME resources. What I'm referring to here is the most generic type of BIBFRAME entity. So this is something that was included in BIBFRAME 1.0, but is no longer used in 2.0 or 2.1, but we do continue to use it in the BIBFRAME Lite vocabularies. So BIBFRAME Lite is a set of experimental vocabularies that Zafira started to use once they stopped working with the Library of Congress directly. And this allowed us to iterate and experiment while also keeping an eye on the Library of Congress's BIBFRAME and mapping to that when possible. So here's a high-level overview of the BIBFRAME Lite classes. And I have put a link to my slides in the chat if you'd like to see more here, but I've linked to a spreadsheet where I have mappings to BIBFRAME 2.1, and all of the classes in purple here have equivalencies in BIBFRAME 2.1. There are also things that aren't included in BIBFRAME 2.1, like concept. I heard Xiaoli's question about preserving pre-coordinated strings, and concept is something that we use to do that. So today, the way that the Library Link Network works is we take MARC bibliographic records and then transform them into BibFrame resources to create local data graphs. And then those local graphs are connected across the network. And for every resource, we identify it with a hash or a fingerprint that creates a unique ID for that thing. And the Library Link Network is ILS and discovery layer neutral, which means that it works with every system available. There are a few different ways to use this data. So one is consuming the data directly. I'll talk about syndication, but we syndicate this BibFrame data to partners for specific purposes. And those partners include Google and the Internet Archive. But these resource feeds and open data are available for any application to use directly. We also publish data graphs on the open web, so they can be crawled by indexers or they can be downloaded to upload into other applications as well. So what we've been working on most recently is creating an internal data viewer that shows inactive resources and events that are related to each data graph. We've been amping up our reconciliation services and data normalization to improve reconciliation within local graphs, as well as within regions and across the network as a whole. And we've been extending the BibFrame identifier class. So currently we're using over 50 different types of BibFrame identifiers. And these include authority IDs, as well as common identifiers used across industries, and internal IDs that we have at EBSCO. But for each of these, we've created a RESTful API endpoint, which allows users to submit an ID and then get back related information about that resource. So the BibFrame Lite vocabularies and the Library Link Network are used for a few specific purposes. Our goals are to make catalog data portable and visible so that it can be shared anywhere on the web. And through sharing this data, libraries can make engagements richer to show people connections to the people, places, and topics that are related to the works that they're looking at. And then most recently, we've been using the Library Link Network to start making catalogs better, with our primary focus being on improving MARC records to send back to Folio. And EBSCO provides hosting services for Folio, so that's why we're focusing there first. The way this works is we take the MARC records and then we're generating links for every entity. So we're creating URIs for works, instances, items, places, people, all those classes that you saw. We're also reconciling this with authoritative data sources like LCNAF and ORCID, and anywhere we find an ID that can be created, that a link can be created out of, then we're doing that as well. And then from there, the libraries use their data graph to grab data and share it on any website. They do this by grabbing an iframe code. So on average, we're generating anywhere from 15 to 20 BibFrame resources for every record. And we're also creating relationships between these resources as well. So to look at a specific triple, the links on the left and the right are BibFrame resources from the DC Public Library. And you'll see that they use their own link domain. So link.dclibrary.org is something that they manage themselves, and that's an option that all participating libraries have. If they're not able to manage their own link domain, then we do provide a default for them. But here, in pink, you'll see the fingerprints or resource IDs. And these are generated using the type of BibFrame resource. So we know we input the type work as well as the label. And for people, for example, we use distinguishing factors such as birth and death dates that go into those fingerprints as well. But together, these BibFrame resources and relationships create ever-expanding graphs that are refreshed as libraries send updated catalog records for us to transform. And then those local graphs are connected across the network using those matching identifiers that we create. So a few benefits of decentralizing data in this way is that it helps unlock catalog data so that libraries don't have to wait for people to come to the catalog, but they can bring the catalog data to any website. And it also helps libraries begin to see what is common across their collections and what's unique to their collections as well. So I don't have time today to get into a full tour of a data graph, but I have included example links for a few different classes here from the University of Melbourne's library. And again, in pink, you can see all of those fingerprints or resource IDs that we're using. So if you'd like to dig in to their data, you can use those links there. So in the next part of my presentation, I'm going to talk about syndication. And when I'm talking about syndication, I'm talking about the process of delivering actionable data to the point of need, when, where, and how users need to use that data. So a few early examples of syndication on the web include RSS feeds and Atom feeds. And then the examples that I talk about today are all generated from Library Link resource feeds. And I've included an example resource feed for the person bell hooks here that you can look at if you'd like to see that in detail. So the libraries use syndication to embed data on different websites. So from their data graph, they can search for a person or a topic and then grab an embed code and put that on any website. And when they do this, they're not just sharing data about or they're not just creating new pathways for humans to get into the catalog by clicking those titles. They're also adding structured data markup that tells the web who they are and what they have to offer as a library. A few examples of these embeds include this example from the East Baton Rouge Public Library in Louisiana in the United States. And they're using embedded BibFrame resources to highlight the work of Black authors on their LibGuides. So you'll see all of these books here by the author Jessamyn Ward. And these lists are automatically updated as the library refreshes their data graph. So another example of embeds being used are from the European Parliament Library. And here you can see selected reading about European citizenship. And I've included links to a few more topics of other LibGuides that they've embedded BibFrame resources on. And each one of these titles brings users directly into their Primo catalog. So we syndicate data for our partners as well, which include Google. And Google uses our feeds, which we share book feeds and library feeds with them, to provide the option to borrow books near searchers in the United States, Canada, and Australia. And you'll see here on the bottom right, these borrow options here lead directly into library catalogs. Google's also integrated this into their What to Read feature. And as more libraries publish structured data, we're partnering with Google to launch this option in additional countries. So you'll hear about another country coming up later this year. So here's an example of what a search looks like if I'm looking from campus at the University of Melbourne. If I were to search for the book, A Darwinian Left, then you'll see the knowledge panel appear on the right. And from here, it uses the person's location to show the nearest libraries near them. So I can click this borrow link, and that brings me directly into the University of Melbourne's Sierra catalog. Here's what the What to Read feature looks like on mobile search. So here, Google's integrated borrow options when you do topical searches. And this is something that they've been improving. It's a new feature, maybe about a year old, but they're making improvements to add more faceted search options. But if I were to search for a topic like books about feminism, then you'll see book titles come up, and I can tap on one of those and then use the borrow option to get directly into my library catalog. And that's being powered by resource feeds from the Library Link network. Libraries also use syndication to share knowledge panels. So here we are using mappings to Wikidata to pull in biographical information about authors, and then displaying all of the related resources that are mapped to that Wikidata ID. So you can see all of the books written by and about bell hooks at the San Francisco Public Library. And libraries use these knowledge panels to share this data inside of their catalogs. So at the University of Moncton, they've added these knowledge panels to their enterprise catalog, and you can use that borrow link at the bottom to see what that looks like. All of this is tracked with stats dashboards, so libraries can see how many times people are getting to their catalog to borrow options from Google's knowledge graph, as well as from the open web or any of the applications that we provide to users. And most of these stats dashboards are private, but the DC Public Library has made their dashboard open. So you can use this link here to see their most recent statistics as well. So this next portion of my presentation, I'm going to talk about resource enrichment. And that's the process of finding the overlap between two graphs and then using data from one graph to make another graph better. We can do this process by finding matching people, topics, places, really any BibFrame resource type, and it also works with any identifier type. But essentially, once we find something like a matching ISBN, we can pull in any extra classes and properties that are included in one graph and then add them to another graph. The earliest example of enrichment we did with the Internet Archive. So they provided their data to us. We created a data graph, and then we matched that to local data graphs. For example, the Boston University here. And so for every matching ISBN or instance that we found, the open library gets a new copy of that book to lend through controlled digital lending. We also use enrichment to map to Wikidata, which is in part what powers those knowledge panels that I showed. And most recently, it's allowing us to access additional things like descriptions, alternative names, and labels in other languages that help libraries support multilingual search. Another example of existing enrichment that we have at EBSCO, we do in partnership with a group called Novelist. And Novelist works with public libraries, and they provide reader recommendation services. And so they use these things that they call appeal terms to help readers find books that they want to read. So again, here we use ISBN matching, and every time we find a match, we add appeal terms from Novelist data to the library's local data graph. And what this allows a library to do, for example, is go to the appeal term accessible and then grab all of the books with an accessible writing style and then share that on any website that they'd like. So what's new? Now I'm moving on into the what's on the horizon section. We're expanding our enrichment services to include a lot more data sources. So everything you see listed here, plus other ideas that are being shared by participating libraries. For example, subject headings from the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, which are really important in Australia because they were created in partnership with the communities that they describe. So libraries in Australia are interested in enriching records and sharing subject headings based on matches within their data graphs. So one quick example of this new type of enrichment with the University of Melbourne Library, I'm going to walk through an example that we used LC-NAF data for. So before enrichment, the library did have an authority link to LC-NAF, but the date of this person, Bell Hooks, was inaccurate because unfortunately she passed away last December. So we were able to get LC-NAF data from the Library of Congress's website, which is available at this download link here on the bottom right of my screen. And again, we used SCOS JSON, we extended our pipeline, we transformed LC-NAF data to create a data graph, and then used those LC-NAF identifiers to find the overlap between that graph and a local data graph. So in this case, for the University of Melbourne, we grabbed Bell Hooks's death date, and we added it to the local data graph. So here you can see an accurate description of Bell Hooks, and this was done with no manual cataloging work. So another big thing that I've been working on this year is helping libraries figure out how they want to extend Folio to include BibFrame functionality. I'm doing this through a proof of concept project that I started this summer with a few Folio libraries that EBSCO hosts Folio for. And we're collecting information from libraries in Chile, Australia, and New Zealand to figure out why they want to use linked data and how. And then we're also integrating this into our plans for Folio development over the next year. And to clarify, EBSCO strongly believes that Folio does need to remain open source and community driven. So anything that we do to improve Folio will not just be available to the libraries that we host Folio for, but any participating Folio library. So the proof of concept concludes at the end of the year, and you'll be hearing more once we report out. But here's a preview of the feedback that we're getting. And if you have any input to share, you can send that to me through email. But these libraries are asking for entity management functionality, which is one of the most well-defined areas in this space, thanks to leaders like Jason Kovari and others who have been working on that for years. Libraries are also asking for automated entity management, for data syndication so that they can share their catalog data across applications. They're interested in sharing BibFrame resources within consortia, within regional groups, as well as across the network. And they've also asked for services that can provide tighter integration between their catalogs and other systems on campus. And then, of course, libraries are asking for editing functionality and storage as well. I did see somebody in Slack ask if there is a timeline for storage of BibFrame and Folio, and you'll be hearing more about our roadmap in the coming months, but I don't think it's going to take very long. I could see BibFrame storage becoming available in the next 12 months, most likely. In addition to meeting the needs of these different functionalities, we're also going to be extending our pipeline. So this is something that we've done for other purposes inside EBSCO. We've created a Unimarc to BibFrame transformation, as well as a reverse, so MARC and Unimarc back to BibFrame. And then we're taking that and integrating it into our main pipeline for the Library Link network, as well as addressing the needs of other MARC formats. And then, of course, through all of these new use cases, we're going to be aligning our data services with the BibFrame model maintained by the Library of Congress. So to sum it up, we're using the Library Link network to help libraries unlock their catalogs and provide data where their users are searching and finding information. We allow libraries to weave this data into the web by publishing it on open data graphs, and from there they can embed it on any website. Through participating in the network, libraries are starting to see what's common and unique among them. And then what I'm most excited about is that EBSCO will be working with libraries to extend Folio with BibFrame functionality so that they can provide on-demand access through any website or application. And that's all I have for you today. I do have Slack up so I can see the questions.
Thank you, Gloria, for your presentation. Any question? Yes.
Matthias Frosteros from the National Library of Finland. You mentioned the fingerprinting URIs. What happens if the sort of distinguishing features change? Does the URI change? That, for example, if the person changes their name or there was a mistake in the date of birth or whatever, does the URI change?
Yeah, the URI does change, and then the previous URI becomes inactive. We don't delete any resources, we make them inactive and then relate them to the new resource that replaced that resource. So we would mint a new URI, it would have a slightly different fingerprint. And then when you go to that URI in the internal data viewer, you can see all of the related inactive resources that were related to that work, instance, or item previously. But if anything changes like punctuation, capitalization, then a new fingerprint is created. So I saw Beth asked if I have thoughts on the interoperability between BibFrame Lite and BibFrame 2.0. Yes, I do. So I'm really excited to bring these vocabularies together. As you see, we have a partial mapping to BibFrame, the newest versions of BibFrame, but I've been working to do a full mapping to all of the latest classes and properties. BibFrame Lite started as an experiment for specific use cases, but since we've been using those vocabularies, the Library of Congress has stabilized their vocabulary and extended it for use cases that we haven't used yet, like original cataloging. So as we move forward into integrating BibFrame into Folio, we will be using the Library of Congress's BibFrame vocabulary, along with any BibFrame-like classes that are needed during temporary transition. I could see our vocabulary, either us just going straight to BibFrame 2.0, and any other purposes, we would maybe use a library link namespace. But it's really ultimately up to the participating libraries and what they'd like to use. We also aren't only limited to using BibFrame with Folio, we're interested in other vocabularies that libraries want to use as well.